Hi, I'm James Williams and welcome back to my channel. So in this video I want to show a component I've built in Power Apps Canvas Apps, which is this bit in the bottom left here, which is a dynamic gallery for displaying hashtags found in some text. So I've got a text input here, and as I go through and add in some hashtags, so adding a hash at the start of words, you can see that at the bottom the gallery is filling up with hashtags. And as I reach the end of a line, that's a word that's already appeared, that's why it's not added a word at the bottom there. But as I keep going through and adding words, hopefully I'll find some new ones. Whenever it doesn't fit on a line, it scrolls down to the next one. So not only does it appear down here, but you can also see on this side, we're able to read the output of this component and see what hashtags are being seen and summarized, and also whether or not they are selected. So by clicking on the hashtags in this gallery, you can see they highlight in a different color, but also they're reading out into the app as selected. So if we wanted to do something with that in our app logic, we could do. So if that sounds interesting and you want to see how this is built, please stick around for the rest of the video. So this idea is heavily influenced by the recent blog from Dave Wyatt here on the Power Apps community blog, which is called Components from Components Dynamic Tags. So he's done a similar thing here, where he's got a list of 10 potential tags which you can enter in text boxes along the right hand side, and as he adds those, these are dynamically positioning themselves in the container on the left. So it's a bit of a different approach. Dave here has used a container with 10 fixed buttons inside, which we can see that he's done here in his setup. But some of the really interesting things that caught my eye in this blog were how he's calculated what the width of those buttons should be, which he's essentially done with this formula here, which takes the size of various letters in the font he's used, and almost per pixel tells you what those sizes are going to be, the size of those characters, adding on some padding. So that tells you how wide a button needs to be to fit a certain bit of text. And then what he's done is he's worked out the X and Y coordinates of those buttons based on whether adding each button in would fit on the existing row. So if there's enough space left on the row, then he'll put it on the same row, and if not, then we'll go down to another row below and start again. So it's quite an interesting approach. But one thing that did catch my eye as well is he's put this at the start: why not a gallery? A gallery seems like the easy way, he says, but it doesn't allow the tags per row to be dynamic. So on his example, the first two rows have 2, and then the third row here has 3 icons, and that's because the text is slightly smaller, a slightly less lengthy text within these 3 buttons, so you can fit more buttons on a row. But I thought we'd give it a go with a gallery, because doing a similar approach, we can, for each item in the gallery, calculate the required X and Y position, and use a technique within a gallery to overlay each item in a gallery on top of each other, which we'll cover in this video. So here we are back in the Power Apps Studio, and we've got the component here, component tag gallery 1, or the instance of the component we built, and that's this bit in the bottom left. And we can see that it's got some input properties. One is the text, which in this case is just coming straight from the text input canvas control here, text input canvas 1 dot value. So that's the text at any time that is in this box, which the user can amend. The other properties determine the spacing of the buttons. So button padding is the space around and between the buttons, and button margin is the space within the buttons, but so between the edge of the button and the text within it, and on the other side that's the margin. So we can increase this value to make the buttons much wider. I find it looks quite good at 20, and button padding equally, we could increase that if we wanted to increase the space of the buttons, but that looks nice at 10, so I'll leave those be. So they're the input properties, and the component has an output property which the table's reading here into its items parameter. That's just called output tags. So that's a list of the names of the tags and whether or not they're selected. So if I select a few here, you can see that the selected tags start to show up in this column here. So let's next go over to the component side to see how this is all working. So on the component screen, we can see it's a very simple setup. We've got the outside component here with those input properties we mentioned before. One is just a text property coming from the text box outside the app or any source in the app itself. And the important bit for this is that we're raising OnReset when the value changes. And I've done this for all of the input properties for the component. And that's because when we change any of these things, we want the component to update and show the new tags if there are any, and also to be the correct size if someone's changed those button padding or button margin properties. So the size and the values of the hashtags will update as soon as those change, because all the logic within the app is happening within this component gallery's OnReset function, which we'll come to a bit later. So the other input properties here are two numbers. One's button padding, which we've explained previously. Again, OnReset, raise OnReset when value changes is selected, and the same with button margin. So they're identical in terms of their setup. And lastly, we have that output tags output property, which is just a table data type output from the component. And I'll show you how that works again later on after we've covered what's happening in the OnReset function. So they're the properties. And we can see in terms of the structure of the component, it's very, very straightforward. We've got one vertical container first, and the main reason for that is that we've been able to select vertical overflow to scroll. So what that means back on the app is if there's too many hashtags in the text to fit in on screen in this component space, it starts scrolling down. So to enable that, we've included that vertical container, and we've set vertical overflow to scroll. Otherwise, it's just in the top left, 0, 0 are its coordinates. The width is set to the parent width, which is the size of the component, the width of the component, and similarly for the height. So this otherwise just matches exactly the size of the component. So then within that container, we've got one vertical gallery, which is where all the clever stuff in terms of how the app works, the component works, happens. There's no scrolling setup here, but basically we've got the scroll bar showing. So when there's too many things in the gallery to fit, that scroll bar will appear. But the height here is set in a particular way, and this is to set the height to be the height of the component, so parent.height, which is flowing through vertical container up to the height of the component. So there's not that many tags in the gallery. We'll just inherit that component height so that the gallery matches exactly the size of the container and the component. But otherwise, if there are too many rows of icons in the gallery, then we're going to calculate the size of this gallery to be the right number of rows. And I'll show you how we get to this row number in a bit when we go through the OnReset function. And lastly, within the gallery, there's only one control in each instance of the gallery, and that's this button. It's a modern canvas button. And this is set, most of its properties are set dynamically, so you can see it's coming from the value within the items of the gallery. Its X position is set there, its Y position is set with a formula here, we'll come back to. The width is also set dynamically, this item.width, but the height we've just fixed at 40, so we've kept that the same. So the secret then is how all these values are set. And as I mentioned before, that's all done within this OnReset function, within the components OnReset function, which we'll go through now. Okay, so here's the function. So the first thing at the top here is we need a space to store our selected tags, and that's not set by this function, but whether or not someone's clicked on the button further down. But we need to make sure that that collection exists. So this just says if blank or error. So when we first start, it might not exist. We'll just clear collect an empty table into that col selected tags collection, just so it exists and we can use it further down and around the app. So then the rest of the work is done with this collection, which I've called col sorted tags. So the first thing that this function does is it collects a temporary record, which will be deleted right at the bottom. We'll delete this record out. You can see we're deleting it out by remove if, where the value is temp, which is the value here in this temporary record. So we can pretty much ignore the value there. That's not going to show up in our output. But we're showing what properties we're going to be collecting in this record. So we're going to have a value that's going to be the text of the hashtag that will be displayed in the button. And then what row in the gallery do we want to show this button on? So we're going to start with -1 for this temporary record, because we want the first actual button to be on row 0 and so on. We're collecting the X position of each button, so that can be used to set the X position of the button within the component. So for this temporary record, I've just set it to a really high number, which will never work. And that's to do with the way it checks to see if the next button will fit on each row. But we're also going to store the width of the button and the index of the button in this collection. And I'll show you why a bit later on. We need that for this technique to work. So once we've got that temporary record stored in our cleared and refreshed col sorted tags collection, we then do a for all loop going through the output of this section here, which is actually revealing all the unique tags. So what it does first is it does a match all, which uses a regular expression, which is this bit in quotes here, to find any hashtags in the input text. So the input text comes through, in this case, from the canvas, the text input canvas control in the app, coming via the input text property into the component, and then we're doing a match all to find all the hashtags within it. So you could just stop there, but the problem is we don't want duplicate hashtags to be repeated. This ignores case for now. So what we want to do is we want to get a distinct list of those tags, so that we've not got any duplicates in there, and we're going to determine whether something's a duplicate by just getting the lower text version of it. So the text doesn't matter for this. If it's uppercase or lowercase, it will still match a tag with the same letters in, because we've lowercase them all before we've run it through distinct. So this alone would return a load of lowercase unique tags, which might be fine. We can stop there if that's all we want. But what I've done here is I've added a new column back in called original text, where I've looked up from the this temporary tags collection here what the original match was, so that this will get the first result that it found going through the input text of that hashtag, and it will store how that was capitalized. So we can see this back in the app, because here we've got this Helen-tesque hashtag, so that's a capital P there. You can see that in the bottom, but lower down we've got a lowercase p, and it's not this version that shows up in the tag gallery, because the first one to appear in the input text was the capital P. So it's storing the first version of whichever hashtag that it sees before moving on. So then once we've got all the hashtags, we need to figure out where those buttons would land, with one button for each hashtag. So the first bit here is we've calculated the button width, and we've done this in a very similar way to the way Dave did, except I've used a monospaced font, so all the characters are the same width, and because of that it maybe looks worse if you don't like that font, but the calculation is much simpler. So if you want a more complex fonts with different character widths, do go and look at Dave Wyatt's blog and see his more advanced formula there. But to keep things simple here, I've just said each character is going to be 12 pixels. So we've got the tag, which is the hashtag. We're splitting it on an empty string, which means we get an array of each character. We're going to count those rows, so how many characters are in that string. We're going to times it by 12, and then we're going to add on the button margin, which is that input. So the button margin actually covers both sides of the text. So that gives us the width of each button. And because we then reference the previous tag as we're going through them one by one, I've just called that last tag here for ease. So that's picking up the last value in the col sorted tags column. Because at the moment, when we first start, the only record in there is this temporary value. And as we go through the rest of this formula, we're going to collect each hashtag into it. So as we go on, the last tag will be the previous hashtag that we processed. So the next thing we're doing here is we're doing that check to see whether the next button, so button width, will fit within the existing space on the current row. So we're checking, does the gallery width, which is the maximum space we've got in the gallery, is that less than the X position of the previous button plus the width of the previous button? So that takes us to the end of the previous button in terms of X coordinates. We're adding on the button padding and then the new button. So if that overflows past the width of the gallery, then we know we need a new row, which takes us down this route. And if we've got space, then we go down this route and we collect a slightly different record into the col sorted tags collection. So because we've got last tag.x in here, and the first temporary record has x set to a ridiculously high number, we know that the first time we're always going to end up going down this start a new row. So in this first actual hashtag then, we're getting the value of the tag itself, which is the original text, so that preserves that capitalization rather than the lowercase version of the tag. And then what row do we want it to be on? Well, we want to take the previous tag's row and add 1 to it, so we're starting a new row. So for the temporary one, that was -1, so the first button will be on row 0. The width, we already know, that's the button width, that's calculated up here. So the X position will be, for the first button in a new row, will just be the padding, which is the space on the left before the button starts. And then we're recording for each button the index of that button, and we'll use this to calculate the Y position. So we're just going to take the index of the previous button, which for the temporary record was -1, and we're going to add 1 to it. So the first actual hashtag will have index 0, as well as row 0. And we go through this every time we're starting a new row because the next button won't fit. But where the next button will fit on the same row, we're getting the same value of the hashtag. The row will remain the same as the row from the last tag. The width, again, is button width, that's the same. But the X position is going to be slightly different. So previously we just had the button padding because we were starting at the left-hand side of a new row. But where we're carrying on a row, we need to know the X position of the last button as well as the width of that button. So the X plus the width takes us to the right-hand side of the existing button. We add on the button padding, and then this is the point at which we're going to start the new button, the new X coordinate. The index is similarly just 1 above the index from the last tag. And that's it. So we go through, we'll have a whole set of hashtags in here, and we'll know which row they fit on based on the width of those buttons. We'll know how wide they are, and we'll know their X position. And then using this index, we're going to calculate their Y coordinate. And at the end, we don't want that temporary record in there, so we're just doing a remove if where that value is that temporary value. So that gives us the clean collection. Right, so over to the button itself. We saw before that the X value, the width, and the text all come from the collection, but the Y value is actually calculated here. So we can see how that's done. And what happens here is we set the Y value based on the row of the current item starting at 0, and we times that by the height of the button. So that's just this 40 here plus the button padding. So for every row we want a button and some more padding to go below it. And we're taking away from that the index of the item, and I'll explain why in a second. And then we're adding on that the padding, which will be for the top of the button. So the key trick here is this item.index. So starting at 0, every button has an index incrementing by 1 each time, and that's because the template height of the gallery, so the vertical gallery has a template size of 1. You can't set this as 0, unfortunately, which means there's a 1 pixel row in the gallery for every single button. But the buttons themselves don't need to sit or start at that y coordinate for each row in the gallery. We can put them anywhere based on this y coordinate, even back above a previous row, so they overlap. So because we want each button to be aligned in terms of their tops, the trouble with just using the following without this item index here would be that every button would be 1 pixel lower than the preceding one in terms of the output of the calculation. So for every calculation of the y position, we take away the index, and that counters the offset caused by the template size being 1 in the gallery. So all our buttons will be aligned purely based on what row they're supposed to appear on. So the other thing I've done is in the onSelect, a very simple formula that just checks if the current hashtag that the button item relates to. So this item.value is the word of the hashtag. We're checking if that's in the collection called col-selected tags. If it's already in the collection, we want to remove it from the collection. If it's not in the collection, we'll collect it into the collection. So as you click on the buttons, that adds or removes the hashtag from the selected tags collection. So we display that using the base palette color of the button. So if the current hashtag is in the selected tags, then we're going for that green color. Otherwise, I've just gone for a grey. So that will visually show to the user of the component whether or not they've selected a particular hashtag. So lastly, if we go to the component and look how the output property is working. So this is just a table where we're collecting all those outputs, and we can see in the output tags property of the component how this is calculated. So we're basically just taking that col sorted tags value, that's all the hashtags. We're stripping it down to just the name of the hashtag. We don't want all the details about the button going out into the outside app. But rather than just having the name of the hashtag there, we're adding another column back in, which is whether or not the hashtag is selected. So that's just calculated by saying, is that value in the col selected tags collection? So that's it. So the other point you might have noticed in looking at this app here is we're not seeing anything, despite the fact that in the input text I've got some dummy text ready to see, and that's because within here the component is never actually reset. So if we wanted to see it in place, we could just add a button in and reset the component. So if I click that, we'll see, and just delete that button again, we'll see this is what the output of all our hardware there looks like. So this is useful to test as we go throughout. But that button doesn't need to be in there because the reset happens from the app whenever that input text or one of those other input properties is changed. That raises that OnReset, which then runs through the logic in our OnReset function. So the last thing I'll just mention here is going back to the height of the vertical gallery. This makes a bit more sense now because we can see where we've got too many rows. We know that the number of rows can be obtained from the last item in the col sorted tags collection. So the last item .row is the number of rows that we've got for all our buttons. I tried a 1 here, and then because it's 0 based in that calculation, in that collection, sorry. And then we've multiplied that by the height of the button and the height of the padding combined, plus one more padding for the space at the bottom. So we know that now we can calculate the number of the amount of space, the amount of vertical space we need for the component, and if that's going to be higher than the component itself, we'll set the gallery to that higher amount which will enable the scrolling back in the outside app here, like this. But if I delete a few of these hashtags here, then you can see that scroll has disappeared, because now we fit all those buttons on the component at its normal size. So that's it. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please drop a like and consider subscribing to this channel. And all that leaves for me to say is see you later, App Maker.